It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Joining us once again, we have Congressman Bruce Westerman calling in. Congressman, welcome back to the program, sir.
Good morning, Paul. Good to be with you this morning.
Yes, sir. It's
still rubbing that sore spot from the Hogs losing last night. But,
oh man.
Yeah, it was. I've told my kids all along that the closer you get to success, the worse the defeats hurt. So we were right there on the precipice and missed that catch. But
you hate it for those. You hate it for those three ball players that were right there when the ball dropped. I mean, I really hate it for those three individuals.
Yeah, I mean, and they'll never forget that. But think of the life lessons that we all learned from it. I mean, think about how important communication is, and they'll be able to tell stories for a long time. But what a great year they had. And I mean, as bad as I hate to say it, Oregon State had a heck of a team, and that freshman pitcher was something else.
Don't the Razorbacks though have I guess a lot of freshmen are on their team as well, so they may have a lot that'll be back. I mean, assuming they're not drafted.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
We'll be cheering for them again next year.
Yeah,
we've got football coming up now.
That's true. Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on, Congressman Bruce Westerman. And I want to talk about a few things. Let's talk about the budget first. As of right now, as of today, the House has passed 4 of the 12 appropriation bills necessary for funding our government before the end of the fiscal year. I mean, I know this is something that you've wanted the Congress to do for a long time, return to kind of a regular order in the budgeting process. But you also have to have the Senate that's going to play ball as well, right?
Yeah, and hats off to the Senate for taking up 3 of those appropriation bills. That's a feat within itself. So they're slowly making progress. I think the president telling them in March that he wasn't signing another omnibus may have gotten their attention. So we've got the military and VA appropriations bill done, the legislative affairs bill, and the energy and water, and also we just did the defense appropriations bill out of the House yesterday. So the neat thing about that is if the Senate can get all 4 of those done, we'll have appropriated well over half the money that will be appropriated, close to 3/4 of the money in the discretionary budget in those 4 appropriation bills. Well, we've still got 8 more that we're working on, and last year the House did all 12 of them. The Senate did 0, so we're way ahead from where we were this time last year.
Can you describe, just for our listeners, the difference between, obviously he doesn't want to sign another omnibus, but the way we've done this for so long, the way we did this for 8 years under the Obama administration, where you're essentially not doing these appropriations, or at least, the House may do them, but they're not going anywhere in the Senate. It's one is the appropriate way of governing, the other is the inappropriate way of governing and spending the taxpayer money, although it certainly seemed to work as far as a lot easier as far as President Obama's concerned. It was to his advantage to do that. Can you kind of tell us the difference there?
Yeah, and it's like everything at the federal government, it can be complicated, but I'll try to summarize it the best I can here on the radio. But you've got 2 major tranches of spending. You've got mandatory spending and discretionary spending. The mandatory spending has been set in place by previous Congresses, and you don't have to appropriate money for mandatory spending. So your programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt, and there's about 80 some odd social welfare programs that are on the mandatory side, and most that don't require appropriation bills. That makes up about 70% of all the money the government spends. So then you get over to the discretionary side, and there are 12 specific appropriation bills that are required to pass every year to fund all the discretionary spending. You've got in there the military, you've got transportation, you've got Veterans Affairs. All those bills have to be funded, and money appropriated every year. In the House, we have a committee called the Appropriations Committee, and it's their job to write those bills. Constitutionally, those bills develop in the House, then they're sent over to the Senate. So when you hear people talk about regular order, it means that this bill is drafted in the Appropriations Committee, it's debated there, passed out of the Appropriations Committee, then members are allowed to submit amendments. It's debated on the floor, and you come up with a final bill that you pass out of the House and send over to the Senate. So that's the open, transparent way to do budgeting in government. When those bills don't get taken up in the Senate and passed, we all know that the federal budget runs out on September 30th, and come October 1st, if those bills aren't passed, then you have a, quote, government shutdown, which the government really never shuts down, but it's that's what it's called.
Yeah, that's what they call it. Yeah.
Bill. Yeah. So
and all that process is essentially was avoided in the last 8 years before President Trump, right?
Yeah, and it goes back further than that. The Bush administration didn't get many appropriation bills done either. And the fault lies in the Senate, because they have the 60-vote rule for cloture, and unless you've got a majority party with 60 votes, the other party will use that to not go to cloture and to bring up the bills. But it's been abused much more by the Democrats. And plus, if you get these huge omnibus bills, it gives the Senate a lot more power to go in and negotiate what's in those bills, and it kind of takes the House out of the question. So it's to the benefit of the Senate to do an omnibus bill, or to individual senators. And also, like the previous administration, that's where they would negotiate in a lot of the stuff that they wanted, especially when you had a Republican-controlled House. They would use the appropriations process to jam everything.
Yeah.
So instead of closing the government down, you would do what's called a continuing resolution that would just keep the government funded at the same levels it was funded from the previous year. And the continuing resolution sets another date for when the funding expires. So you keep creating these crisis situations, and it just continues to build lots of anxiety and fretting. And this past year, it was in March before we passed the budget for the spending to the remainder of the year through September. And it was an omnibus bill that bumped the deficit up to over $1 trillion, and had all kinds of stuff that wasn't spending tagged into the bill. That was that 2,300-page omnibus bill. And that's the one that the President signed, but he said it was the last one he was signing. So just the fact that 3 of the bills have been passed already, it wouldn't be a full-blown omnibus, but you could still have a large bill if we don't get more of these appropriation bills done on time.
Well, let's hope you guys do that. We're talking with Congressman Bruce Westerman. I think the normal budgeting process, the constitutional way, is the right way. Can we, just real quick, I want to get your thoughts on what happened last week. You know, nobody wanted to talk about that Inspector General's report with the FBI and everything else. Instead, the media shifted the narrative for an entire week and talked about the border and kids being separated from their parents and everything else. Then there was talk about housing some of these illegal aliens in Arkansas. And we've had people come out. There's been, politicians and stuff, people in power coming out against that. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that whole situation? And Bruce Westerman, would you support housing, illegal immigrants here in the state of Arkansas?
Well, they proposed 2 options. One of them was to build a new center down around Kelso, and that may be the dumbest thing I've ever heard proposed. Go down by the site of a World War II internment camp and build a detention center. Just the optics of that aren't good. So, our federal delegation's been working on this, and that got squashed pretty quickly. So I think that one's off the table. With the Little Rock Air Force Base, I don't think we need to be building migrant holding centers on a military installation, especially one that's got does some of the sensitive stuff that Little Rock Air Force Base believe that one has been taken off the table as well.
Good.
A lot in part by the pretty much unanimous work from our federal delegation with agencies in the federal government. So there's been a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes to take those things off the table. And, it's still the federal government, and something could happen that we're not expecting, but my belief is that we're not going to see either one of those things happen in Arkansas.
Good.
Those holding centers need to be closer to the border, and there's already a lot of facilities out there. There were holding centers that were there during the Obama administration. A lot of the same stuff that was highlighted in the news last week had been going on for a long time, but they just decided to make a huge deal out of it last week.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's just hard for me not to think that the media did this so, nobody was going to be reading what was actually in that Inspector General's report with the FBI, and that's the way I see it. As somebody that follows the news, it was a clear shift, and like you said, a policy that's been going on for a very long time under the Obama administration, and even before that, is now all of a sudden made this huge issue, and it's just it was amazing to see how how they have control over what the left thinks on social media and everything else, and it just turned into this huge deal that was not what it really isn't a huge deal. So,
and if you remember a couple of years ago, Paul, here in Hot Springs where I live, there was a Job Corps center that they closed down, and we were working with the Arkansas National Guard on expanding their troubled youth program onto that facility. And all of a sudden, HHS, under the Obama administration, comes in and tells us they want to make that an unaccompanied minor detention facility to take these kids. And when we say kids, these were probably more like 14 to 17-year-old teenagers.
Right.
That they were wanting to bring and house there, and we had we did a lot of work on that to get it stopped. I never heard the uproar from the left on that, and that was definitely during the Obama administration.
Yeah. So can we talk just a little bit about? I got a bill in front of me about opioid epidemic. I'm over at your website, westerman.house.gov, and you have an article here about this opioid epidemic, tackling the opioid epidemic. What can you tell us about that, Bruce?
Well, we passed a lot of bills in the House. This is a problem that the more you look into it, the more of an issue you realize it is, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners, if not all of them, have a family member or a friend or know of someone that had real problems with opioid addiction. This all goes back to border security as one of the main things. We've cracked down on the prescription opioids, which has put pressure on the drug dealers, since they're not able to get as many over the counter, or not over the counter, but prescription opioids. We're seeing a lot more of them cross the southern border. There's a synthetic opioid. I think I've talked about this on your show before, Paul. It's called fentanyl.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 to 3 milligrams of fentanyl is a lethal dose. This year, the Border Patrol, in this fiscal year, since October 1st, they've seized over 984 pounds of fentanyl. That's enough fentanyl to provide a lethal dose for over half of the U.S. population. That's what they've seized coming across the southern border. So it is a major problem. It's one of the main reasons to do border security. We've got to do something to keep these drug cartels from just having an open pipeline into our society, and we've also got to do something to disrupt the market for the distribution of opioids and fentanyl on this side of the border. And we've passed, I believe, 17 different bills in the House to address this. And it's something that we really need to get a handle on. I hear it from employers more often than not that one of the main hindrances from them being able to hire people is they can't pass a drug test. We've got a tight labor market right now, and I have employers all the time tell me that drug testing weeds out most of the applicants that they get for a job.
What about building the wall, Congressman, or securing the border? I mean, obviously that's got to help, deter
it would help
all this fentanyl coming across the border.
Yeah, it would help tremendously. And I was down in Nogales, and there's sewage lines that cross the border. They ship dope across in sewage lines. They dig tunnels and put small gauge rail inside the tunnels. I mean, these are massive operations that they do getting these drugs across the border, and that's even in a place where you have a wall. But then you go out in the desert, and literally 100 miles at a time, you have basically unimpeded access across the border. Now you've got to cross the desert when you get there, but believe me, for the money that's involved in this illegal drug trafficking, they figure out how to get it across the desert.
Wow. Congressman Bruce Westerman, I appreciate you being on as always. I hope you have a great weekend and a great 4th of July, great Independence Day, and I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, sir.
Yep. Happy Independence Day, and have a good one, Paul.
All righty. Congressman Bruce Westerman, everybody. Got to go to break.